Hello and welcome to the new lesson titled Communication for Special Needs. I am Professor Archana Dasi, Department of Social Work, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. Today in this module, we will be discussing disability as a question of access. Well, accessibility is the practice of identifying and breaking down the barriers that hinder persons with disabilities to live a full and effective life of dignity, respect and independence. Promoting accessibility thus refers to promoting means through which persons with disability will be able to interact as equal members of society. To successfully promote accessibility, it is important to first understand the relevant theories and principles and the physical, information, communication and technological forms in which accessibility products and services are applied. Marginalization takes form across professional, educational, cultural and social sectors, to name a few. This phenomena persists through many entrenched policies, practices and stereotypes that continue to promote the exclusion of persons with disabilities at an institutional level. The cause of this marginalization boils down to one common thread, and that is barriers. Barriers to participation, opportunity and success exclude persons with disabilities across all sectors of society by limiting their ability to benefit from and participate in development on local, regional, national and global scales. A critical key to disability inclusive development is breaking down barriers in order to promote accessibility to the built environment, transportation, information, communication technology and services. The World Health Organization, that is WHO, notes that disability is a part of the human condition and temporary or permanent impairment will be faced by almost everyone at some point in life. Addressing the numerous factors that create barriers to the inclusion of persons with disabilities is therefore not only vital in the development process, but also to ensuring that their rights are met. A number of human rights and development instruments operating at the international and regional levels seek to address these issues by promoting disability, inclusive development. Some are disability specific, while others incorporate the disability perspective in their provisions. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, that is CRPD, is a disability specific human rights treaty that contains a specific article on accessibility, Article 9, which mandates states parties to take appropriate measures to ensure accessibility in the physical environment, transportation, information, communications, including technology and services. Accessibility is also one of the underlying core principles of the CRPD. Article 3 talks about one of principles of accessibility. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development dictates the course of development actions between 2015 and 2030. The 17 Universal Sustainable Development Goals, that is SDGs, in the agenda set the world on the sustainable and resilient path which should leave no one behind. No one left behind is an imperative that underscores the urgent global need for fruits of any development to be shared equitably by all segments of society, including persons with disabilities. The Sustainable Development Goals refers specifically to the persons with disabilities in targets within 5 goals focused on employment, reduced inequalities, education, sustainable cities and partnership, and make implicit reference to disability and accessibility in a further 6 of the goals. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction was adopted in 2015 and is the global mandate to promote disaster risk reduction. The framework makes specific references to disability, accessibility, or universal design in 10 provisions. It underscores the necessity for disaster risk reduction practices to be accessible for persons with disabilities and to empower persons with disabilities to be part of making disaster risk reduction processes accessible. The Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for persons who are visually impaired or otherwise the print disabled was adopted by the Diplomatic Conference of the World Intellectual Property Organization, that is WIPO, WIPO in 2013. Another strategy was the Incheon strategy to make the right real for persons with disability in Asia and the Pacific in 2013 to 2022 is the world's first set of regionally agreed disability inclusive development goals. One of the underlying principles of the Incheon strategy is accessibility, reflected in goal number 3. This goal urges ESCAPE member states to report to the Secretariat in 2017 on the mandatory technical accessibility standards for physical environment and ICT related services, including accessible government buildings, public documents, international airports, and provision of captioning and sign language interpretation on public television news programs. To address the systematic marginalization of persons with disabilities and to promote accessibility as a core pillar of disability inclusive development, it is important to first understand the concept of disability. Put simply, disability is the interaction of two concepts, impairment and barriers in the surrounding environment. Impairment refers to the variance from the norm or loss with regard to the physical and cognitive functioning of an individual. When the surrounding environment does not meet the needs of the individual due to impaired physical and or cognitive functioning, a barrier is formed that limits the capacity of the individual. There are various types of impairments including but not limited to visual, hearing, speech, mobility, psychosocial and cognitive impairments, which can also greatly vary in degree. The variance in degree affects activity limitations and subsequent restrictions to participation. Regardless of the degree of impairment, there are clear barriers that are created as a result, and these barriers create disability by limiting the full and effective participation of persons with impairments. The International Classification of Functioning, Disability and Health (ICF) is a classification system which seeks to provide a scientific basis and common language for understanding and describing health and health related matters. The ICF notes the component of disability as being impairments, activity limitations and participation restrictions. Now, what are all these terms? Let us see impairment first. Impairments refer to problems in body function or structure as a significant deviation or loss. Impairment, when affected by barriers, can lead to limitations in activities, which refers to any difficulties an individual may face in executing a task. This in turn restricts participation, as limitations in activities may prevent an individual from being involved in various types of life situations. There are various types of impairments including but not limited to visual, hearing, speech, mobility, psychosocial and cognitive. Different approaches to assessing disability attribute different significance to impairments, and environmental and attitudinal barriers in creating disabilities. The traditional medical model looks at impairments of individuals as defining and limiting factors, with the response focusing on normalizing and rehabilitating the persons. It fails to recognize the role that society plays in putting up barriers that limit persons with disabilities and promoting social exclusion and discrimination. The social or human rights based model, which is enshrined in the CRPD, on the other hand, places the environmental barriers center stage, examining how societal structures, values and norms limit the full and effective participation of persons who have physical, mental or sensory impairments. It emphasizes the social responsibility to dismantle the barriers and construct disability inclusive societies. The human rights based approach to disability upholds the rights of persons with disability to all human rights and fundamental freedoms on an equal basis with others, including equal access to healthcare, employment and education. The CRPD thus does not confer new rights, but rather injects a disability perspective into these already recognized rights and freedoms, and this is what we want. It also constitutes a tool for social development. This landmark treaty calls for increased respect for the inherent dignity of persons with disabilities as well as their rights to non-discrimination, full and effective participation, equality of opportunity and accessibility. Environmental barriers and attitudinal barriers are the two broad categories for aspects of society that cause the exclusion of persons with disabilities. Let us see what these environmental barriers are. Environmental barriers refer to the challenges faced by persons with impairments in both physical and virtual surroundings. Such barriers pose a challenge on the personal level to complete a certain task, be it mobility, comprehension or interaction based. On the other hand, attitudinal barriers function in a similar manner in that they pose challenges to persons with impairments, though with increased emphasis on the social dimension. These barriers are spread through the negative perceptions and predispositions concerning what can and cannot be achieved by persons with impairments. Environmental and attitudinal barriers shape the interactions between impairments and functioning. In this regard, the removal of barriers facilitates increased functioning and participation and better supports the rights of persons with disabilities. This process constitutes a basis for actions on accessibility. To successfully promote accessibility, it is important to first understand the key concepts of accessibility. So, the key concepts of accessibility are: first, universal design. Universal design is rooted in and also highlights the importance of universally applying the concept of accessibility. Design by nature aims at planning on the functioning of something before it is built or made. The universal design concept asserts that anything and everything should be designed in order to be accessible, not only to the person with diverse disabilities, but more generally to the broadest possible spectrum of humanity. For example, public buildings designed with ramps at entrance ways allows for easy movement of persons with mobility disabilities, along with persons with heavy luggage on wheels, parents with strollers, pregnant women, people with injuries and older persons for whom a sloping surface is often easier to use than steps. Similarly, in the realm of information accessibility, television programs that are produced from the outset with the provision of subtitles, they constitute a form of universal design. Since subtitle enhance the accessibility of programs not only for persons with hearing disabilities, but also people watching in noisy environments or those who are not proficient in the broadcasted language. The concept of universal design calls for the integration of accessibility considerations at the earliest design stages, not as an afterthought once a building, product or service is already completed. The term universal design is often used interchangeably with other terms such as design for all and inclusive design. Reasonable accommodation, that's second thing. Reasonable accommodation ensures accessibility on an individual basis in a context of human rights discourse. In contrast to the universal design, reasonable accommodation seeks to address specific needs rather than integrating needs with those of the general population. It involves tailor-made adjustments to the social or physical environment such as a workplace, classroom, housing, public transport or courtroom in order to accommodate the specific needs of an individual with disability. The next key concept is seamless connectivity. The multidimensional application of accessibility features is crucial for ensuring seamless connectivity, which by definition allows people with disability to move between environments, both physical and virtual, without barriers. Seamless connectivity can be thought of as the combination of multiple accessible parts fitting into a singular accessible whole. In the physical world, this could refer to a low incline ramp arriving at a wide doorway, which opens to an accessible path leading to an accessible lift. In the virtual world, this could refer to an accessible mobile phone used to visit a website that was accessibly designed, through which someone can access real-time text to speech interpretation. Without seamless connectivity, individual pieces are not accessible by design, as the barriers between them inhibit the user from completing a task. Then the next thing is adaptable and replicable. Accessible products and services must be adaptable and replicable in different contexts and over time in order to promote accessibility universally. Such contexts vary in type and influence, as different social, cultural and religious norms may determine how certain products and services can be developed and deployed. Economic and financial factors are similarly important to consider in evaluating whether a product or service to promote accessibility is economically feasible and affordable for both the developer as well as the end user. Then the next thing is physical and information communication technology, that is ICT. ICT accessibility is considered in two forms. One, physical accessibility or accessibility of the built environment, and second, information communication and technology accessibility, that is ICT accessibility. The division into these two categories does not mean that physical and ICT accessibility are mutually exclusive concepts. One of the primary manifestations of the accessibility of the built environment is in the public sphere, where according to the principles of universal design, all individuals, regardless of whether or not they have a disability, should be able to independently navigate and interact with their surrounding environment on an equal basis with others. The public sphere consists of facilities and services that aim to make everyday lives easier, safer and richer for all members of society. It encompasses but is not limited to public transport, police stations, hospitals, courts, banks, shops, toilets, parks, schools, polling stations, museums and libraries, to name a few. Basic physical features to support accessibility in the public sphere may include a ramp to assist persons with mobility challenges reaching a building, or a tactile path on a sidewalk to assist persons with visual impairment find their destination. The next thing is identifying and tackling the inequalities of accessibility. Now, inequalities of opportunity refer to unequal access to the chances required to lead meaningful lives, including in relation to fundamental services such as healthcare and education. Marginalized groups, including persons with disability, are often more susceptible to experiencing such inequalities. In the context of disability, unequal access to physical, social, economic and cultural environments as defined by CRPD creates further barriers to upholding the basic rights of persons with disabilities. As such, inequalities of accessibility refer to these additional barriers and the resulting unequal fulfillment of a life of dignity, respect and independence for persons with disabilities when access is not universal. Within the legal and political frameworks, government should engage civil society organizations and private entities as leaders in implementing initiatives to tackle inequalities of inaccessibility. Disabled people organizations defined by greater than 50% of the decision making body of the organization being persons with disability constitute an important sector of civil society in their ability to advocate for and implement disability support initiatives with stronger benefits to the end user. Disability focused civil society organizations and DPOs complement government data and broad based assessments by providing a community level perspective on accessibility needs of persons with disabilities and disability inclusive development as a whole. With this, we come to an end of the today's lesson, and that will be all for today. Thank you and goodbye.